Imagine you are in 1818, you pick up a novel by an anonymous author. It's about a scientist who built a creature out of body parts and bring it to life. This book is shocking, it's called Frankenstein, and it will change horror forever. Now fast forward 200 years, you are scrolling through a book forum and someone recommended a novel about a man who gets trapped in a smart home with a malevolent AI. The book is called Beta. It is also horror, but the fear is completely different. How do we get from Frankenstein to Beta? From Gothic castles to suburban smart homes? From monsters made of corpses to monsters made of code? Welcome to Harry's Book Cafe, and this is part 4, the finale of our horror series. We have explored why we read horror, built a beginner's map, and traveled to Japan. Today we are staying in the West and tracing the evolution of horror fiction from Victoria era to the present day. By the end, we will see how every fear of every generation has been captured in ink. Let's begin. Horror as a literary genre truly begins with the Gothic movement. The first Gothic novel is usually considered as Walpole's The Castle of Otranto from 1764. It has everything: a haunted castle, a mysterious curse, a villainous nobleman, and a helpless heroine. But the Gothic didn't really find its teeth until the turn of the 19th century. In 1818, Mary Shelley published Frankenstein. It's not just a monster story, it's a story about scientific hubris, parental abandonment, and the loneliness of a creature rejected by its creator. Shelley asked a question that would echo through all future horror. What is the responsibility of the creator to the created? Then came John Polidori's The Vampire in 1819, which introduced the aristocratic seductive vampire, a template that would eventually give us Dracula. And in 1820s, Melmoth the Wanderer gave us the Faustian bargain, a man who sells his soul for extended life, only to spend eternity running from the damnation. These early Gothic novels were obsessed with the past, medieval ruins, Catholic superstition, family curses. The horror came from history that would refuse to be buried. By the mid-Victoria era, horror moved from crumbling castles into the drawing rooms of respectable middle-class homes. The ghost story became a Christmas tradition thanks largely to Charles Dickens. A Christmas Carol is a ghost story, but it's also a moral fable. The ghosts aren't there to terrify Scrooge, they are there to reform him. This was a new idea, horror as moral correction. But the real masters of Victorian ghost stories were writers like Sharonda Lefeville and M.R. James. Lefevue's Camellia predates Dracula by 25 years. It's a lesbian vampire novella set in Lonely Castle. It's deeply unsettling because the monster is beautiful, sympathetic, and seductive. Lefeville understood that the most terrifying monsters is the one that you want to invite in. Then came M.R. James in 1890s and 1990s. His ghost stories are master of quiet dread, a book with a missing page, a whistle found in a tomb, a figure seen just at the edge of a window. James never explained the ghost, he never gives it a backstory, he just let it be, and that was enough. And finally, in the late Victorian era, give us two pillars of modern horror: Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Jekyll and Hyde is about duality of human nature, the fear that we have a monster inside waiting to break free. Dracula is about invasion, contagion, and anxiety of a changing world. Both are still being read, adapted, and referenced today. At the turn of the 20th century, horror took a sharp left turn. A group of writers, mostly British and American, decided that haunted houses, vampires were not enough anymore. They want to terrify us on a cosmic scale. This was the birth of weird fiction. The Great God Pan is about a woman who has glimpsed something behind reality, something ancient and inhuman. The story is famously subtle. You never see the monster, only its effects. But those effects include madness, death, and collapse of identity. Algernon Blackwood gave us The Willows in 1907, about two men camping on a remote island in the Danube River. They slowly realize that the willow trees are sentient, not evil necessarily, but utterly indifferent to human life. Blackwood called it the horror of the unknown, not horror of the horribles. And then came H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft took weird fiction and distilled it into a philosophy. His Cthulhu mythos, ancient godlike being, sleeping beneath the earth, waiting to wake up and destroy humanity. It was the ultimate expression of cosmic horror. The terror isn't that the monster will kill you. The terror is that you don't matter. The universe is vast, old, and utterly uncaring. Lovecraft's prose is dated and his personal views are troubling, but his influence is everywhere, from Stranger Things to Annihilation to Blood Meridian, which is a cosmic horror disguised as a Western. After World War II, horror turned inward. The monsters weren't hiding in the woods anymore. They're hiding in the human mind. This is the era of psychological horror, and no one did it better than Shirley Jackson. Her 1959 novel, The Haunting of the Hill House, is the perfect bridge between Gothic tradition and modern psychological terror. Is the house haunted, or is Eleanor, the lonely, unstable protagonist, simply losing her mind? Jackson never tells us. The ambiguity is the horror. Her short story, The Lottery, is even more chilling. A small town's annual stoning of a random citizen told in the bland, cheerful language of a picnic. The horror comes from normalization of the violence. It's not a ghost, it's us. Around the same time, Richard Matheson wrote I Am Legend, a book about last men on Earth who were surrounded by vampire-like creatures. But Matheson twists the genre. The protagonist isn't a hero, he's a relic. The monsters has formed a new society, and the protagonist is the monster to them. The title I Am Legend is iconic. He's legendary for being the last killer of the new race. And Robert Bloch gave us Cycle, the novel that inspired Hitchcock's film. Norman Bates isn't a supernatural villain. He is a mentally ill man, shaped by abuse and isolation. The horror is that he could be living next door. By the 1960s, horror has fully absorbed the Freudian psychology. The monster was no longer outside, it was inside, in the ID, in the repressed trauma, in the fractured self. The 1970s and 80s are often called the golden age of horror, at least in film. In literature, it was the era when horror got visceral. In 1971, William Peter Blatty published The Exorcist. It brought religious horror into the modern world. It was not a medieval exorcism, but a crisis of faith in a scientific age. The novel is genuinely disturbing, not just for the pea soup vomit, but for the theological despair at its core. In 1974, Stephen King published Carrie. King would go on to define commercial horror for decades to come, blending everyday characters with supernatural dread, small-town settings with cosmic stick. His best works, It, Shining, Pet Sematary, remain gold standard for accessible, emotionally resonant horror. But a darker current was flowing. In the 1980s, a movement called Splatterpunk emerged. Writers like Jack Curriam, Cliff Baker, and Poppy Z. Bright reject the idea that horror needs to be safe or moral. They wanted to push boundaries, to shock, to disgust, to break taboos. Kitchen's Off-Season is about a family of cannibals attacking a group of New Yorkers in rural Maine. It's raw, relentless, and unapologetic. It has no moral lesson, it just wants to scare you deeply and physically. Cliff Baker's Book of Blood makes extreme violence and queer sensibilities and gorgeous prose. Baker showed that splatterpunk could also be beautiful. And Poppy Z. Bright, Exquisite Crops, took serial killer fiction to its logical extreme. Two gay necrophiliac serial killers fall in love. It's deliberately transgressive and asks, why do we need boundaries in art? Splatterpunk isn't for everyone, but it proves that horror could be a place for radical experimentation, and some readers want it to be deeply, truly disturbed. As the 20th century ended, horror becomes self-aware. Writers start asking, what are the rules of this genre? And what happens if we break them? The ultimate meta-horror novel is The House of Leaves. It's a book about a documentary about a house that is larger on the inside than the outside. The page layout is labyrinthine, footnotes within footnotes, upside down text, pages with only single word. Reading it feels like descending into madness. At the time's Gothic revival was also happening. Writers like Susan Hill, Sarah Waters brought back Victorian ghost story conventions with modern sensibility, slower, quieter, and more literary. The 2000s also saw the rise of digital horror. The internet became a source of fear. Scott Smith's The Ruin, it's about a group of tourists trapped on a hill covered in sentient veins. The horror is amplified by their inability to call for help. No signal, no rescue, just slow, sunburned death. And Joe Hill wrote Heart-Shaped Box. It's about a rock star who buys a haunted suit online. The ghost comes in the mail. It is a brilliant update of the traditional haunting for the eBay era. By the 2010s, the line between horror and literary fiction had become completely blurred. The Passage was a literary vampire epic. A Head Full of Ghosts was a possession novel told through the lens of a reality TV. So where is horror today, and where is it going? I think three trends define contemporary horror. The first is the technological anxiety. From Beta and The Passengers to Black Mirror, we are terrified of AI, smart homes, and algorithmic control. The new monster isn't a demon, it's a piece of code that knows your password, your location, your darkest search history, and you can't stab a code with a stick. The second is the return of the political. Recent horror is deeply engaged with social justice, racism, colonialism, patriarchy, and environmental collapse. Mariana Enrique's Our Shares of Night. It's about Argentina's dirty war, reimagined as cult of ancient vampiric beings. Victor Lavalle's The Challenging is about racism, fatherhood, and a horror of missing child in New York City. Stephen Graham Jones' The Only Good Indian is about a group of Blackfeet men haunted by a spirit of revenge for killing a herd of elk. These books aren't just scary, they are angry, and rightfully so. The third is the blind of the genres. Horror is no longer a ghetto, it's a seasoning that can be added to anything. Literary fiction, historical drama, romance. So what's next? My guess is more integration, more experimental forms, more voices from outside the West, and a continued focus on climate horror. The slow creeping fear that our world is ending, not with a bang, but with a rising sea level. But one thing will never change, horror will always ask the oldest questions. What are we afraid of? And why? And what does that fear say about who we are? So that's the journey from the crumbling castles of Gothic fiction to the smart homes of AI horror. From Mary Shelley's Monster to Sammy Scott's Beta, what did we learn? The horror evolves with every generation's deepest anxieties. The Victorians feared that the past coming back to life. The 1950s feared the monsters within. The 1970s feared the loss of faith. And we fear the technology we built might be turning against us. But underneath all this surface fear, there is a constant. Our need to confront the unknown, to touch the darkness, and to come back to the light. This concludes our 4-part series. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you have discovered new books, new perspectives, and maybe a new way of thinking about fear. And if you like this video, please share it with a friend, give it a thumb up, and subscribe to the channel. And then next week I shall bring you something very different. Until next time guys, cheerio.